الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نتعلم تعليم وتذكر تذكيرا نفع الانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث بالتمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وصحبه وسلم والدعاء على الخير والدلالة على الهدى بالتقوى وجه الله سبحانه وتعالى ثوابه وقربه. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد ولك السالم ولك الجاري واجمعنا به في كل أطوارنا وعلى آله وصحبه ونور عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته عدد كل حرف كتب ويكتب وقرئ ويقرأ وسمع ويسمع ورؤيا ويرى من الآبدين ودهر الداهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, we continue with the lessons which were being done in the morning in the Kitab Tawjīh Nabīh and Mardāt Bārīh by Habib Umar, Muhammad bin Salim bin Hafidh. This is a continuation of these lessons, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put barakah in our time. Ramadan is a time in which we learn how to organize our time. Throughout the year, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us with our salah how to organize our time. But in Ramadan, you actually feel how time passes by. Every day you come for Taraweeh, especially if you're someone who leads people in Taraweeh, your whole day goes preparing for the recitation of Taraweeh. For example, the Kuffar would spend the whole day preparing for the recitation of Taraweeh. And then the 20 rak'ats go very quickly. And you can actually see the days going by. The perfection, or if you can use the usage of time, is one of the mujahadat that a aspirant or a spiritual wayfarer needs to take into account. For example, Imam al-Ghazali in the Bidayatul Hidayah, his whole book is, after the beginning, is about organizing your time, to have something to do at every part of the day. So for example, our salah, the way salah is done now in our masajid, it's precisely at specific time. So 10 minutes past 5, salah starts. Obviously in the past it was when the imam came, because there was an imam that everyone accepted. So if he was a few minutes late, people were happy with it. Today if the imam is 2 minutes late, they'll put someone else in front. But in a way it teaches you to be 10 minutes past 5. It means you have to plan your time. If you don't leave the house at the right time, you don't plan your drive, you don't plan the walk to your garage, right? What's going to happen? You're going to get delayed. And so the perfection of time is one of the things a person has to master. And we notice when we read the lives of the pious, or when you spend time in the company of the pious, if you only look at the time of, if you only look at the amount of adhkar that they did, you'd think that they did nothing else in their life besides adhkar, because there was so much that they were doing. But when you study in a 24-hour span, everything was given its specific time. If you study how much books they read and studied and taught and attended lessons, you think they did nothing else the whole day besides attend lessons. And if you read how they mixed with people and reconciled between tribes and counsel people, you think they did nothing else in their life besides spend time with people. And this is due to the barakah of the time. The lesson, as Imam Ghazali says, is for a person to give everything its due place. Your time for adhkar must be at a specific time. Your time for work, we know a specific time. If you go to work before the office is open, you can't work. Right? So our spiritual works also need to have very specific time. And if you do things at specific times every day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in your time. And you're able to do things consistently. And even though it is small and short, but over a long period of time, you end up with it. You end up with something very, very magnificent. We looked recently at this tafsir, not the tafsir, the translation of the Quran that Shaykh Hamim Kala came out with. It's called the Quran Bihal, apparently one of the best translations available. And there's probably no one more apt than him to attempt such a translation of the Quran. But when you read the intro or his introduction, he says it took him 17 years to write this translation. If he said 17 years, night and day, course not. He had 1 hour lesson every day with the teacher. I think it was before Dhuhr, where he would attend the lesson and take his notes. And then he'd sit afterwards and just go through his notes and work on his translation. Right? He spent 8 years studying the entire tafsir of one of the best mufassirin in Jordan at the time, and then he spent another 8 years revising his translation with him. But consistently, every single day, what happens at the end of 16 years, you end up with something that's... Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah ta'ala alayh, he compiled his Sahih al-Bukhari. Also, they say in about 15 or 16 years. And generally, when we read Sahih Bukhari, there's over 8,000 hadith. 8,000 and something hadith, right? So we know what was his conditions before he put any hadith into his collection, he would go take the ghusl, and pray 2 rak'ats of istikhara, right? Consulting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on whether this hadith fits the criteria of Sahih or not. You think 8,000 hadith, that's it. MashaAllah, you're sitting the whole day. If you calculate it, it's 1 or 2 hadith every day. But every single day, that was his practice. So small benefits. And this is the difference between people who are sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and people that are doing things for the sake of people. People that want to do things for the sake of people, you find that there is a rush in their work. They always want to finish up. And there's also our modern lifestyle. They want to do things. You want to get your degree. You want to finish up in so many years so that you can say, I studied or I graduated. And when you study even Islamic studies in the Arab world, sometimes with the authentic mashayikh, the traditional mashayikh, you'll end up sometimes studying a book that would be studied in a university sometimes in 6 months. But with the mashayikh, you'll study it in 3-4 years. And they teach you to get out of that habit of wanting to rush. Sometimes you come, they'll tell you, repeat yesterday's lesson again. You come the next day, they'll say, repeat yesterday's lesson again. Until you learn that I'm here for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not for the sake of, being able to tell people I studied this, or I did that, or I completed so many books, or I read so many books to a particular sheikh. One of our mashayikh, he says he read one entire book from cover to cover with his sheikh. And he said he worked hard and he revised and he did and he knew that, this is going to be impressive for the sheikh. And so he's waiting now, as soon as he finishes the book. He had studied even the book after that. So he was ready for the next lesson. He wants to impress his teacher. And then Shaykh tells him, repeat the book again. Right? And the book takes about 6 months to study. The Shaykh studied with him in 1 year. He's repeated it again. It's the second time. Now I'm reading, I've done all the research, but my intentions are changing now. Why am I coming to the lesson? And he says, only at the third time when the Shaykh told me repeat it again, then I realized that we're not here to impress anyone. We're not here for the sake of name and fame here, right? Only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the meaning of Imam Shafi'i's saying, that he said, طَلَبْنَا الْعِلْمَ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ فَأَبَى الْعِلْمَ أَنْ يَكُونَ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. Right? And this is the saying of many of the scholars and the pious. They would say, we began seeking knowledge for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but knowledge was averse to us until we sought it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَبَى الْعِلْمِ, meaning knowledge refused to come to us. Meaning we've knocked our heads trying to seek knowledge until we realized sincerity, that it's only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you did that, that's when the knowledge opened up. Many times you'll see, or you'll read, or you'll hear from people that they read a book 2 and 3 and 4 times. Because it's not about the time, it's about the sincerity. And so sometimes you would need to have to read a book a second and a third time, because the first time you read it, perhaps the person's intention wasn't sincere. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us sincerity. None of us has sincerity. This is just what we read in the books of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is because of their barakah that we're able to do anything that we do. In continuing with the lessons that we were talking about, the focus was on da'wah, the importance of da'wah. Umar finished the last paragraphs. He was talking about how a person needs to be sincere in the da'wah, right? And that how much are we going to be complaining about our egos in the field of da'wah. You want to do this because of this particular reason, or you tell someone there's a need for this and they make 1,000 excuses. Right? He ended up saying that this person is not a soldier of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's a soldier of his own nafs. If there's a need in a community for da'wah and you realize that need, and someone tells you, or the teacher advises that this is important for you, you need to go and teach people, this particular thing, or you need to go and take care of a particular project, right? And the person thinks, no, but I'm not ready, or I need to do this. If the instruction is down from the teacher, then this is your responsibility, right? And in the field of da'wah, we are all amateurs. Whether you've been working in the field of da'wah for 20 years or 50 years, you are still an amateur. We are all still amateurs. And Habib Umar always says that if every single person on the face of the earth, every single Muslim on the face of the earth expends their utmost efforts, meaning they are doing 100% of what they are able to do in terms of their health, their wealth, right, and their abilities and capabilities in the da'wah, he says it would still not fulfill the right and the haqq of the da'wah. It is upon us. Because the entire ummah, right, from after the Prophet ﷺ till the day of Qiyamah, will never understand da'wah like the Prophet ﷺ understood it. And no one will be able to give the haqq of the da'wah the way the Prophet ﷺ did. So no matter how much we're doing and how much effort we're making, it will still never be enough. And so can there be excuses for us to say that, we've been doing this or we've been doing that? Continuing with that concept, Habib goes on to say, قال صلى الله عليه وسلم اذهبوا إلى الحبشة. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, when he told the Sahaba, go to Abyssinia, go to Habasha. Right? أيعرفون من في الحبشة? Did the Sahaba know who was in Habasha? What was there? Did they send a party out? Did they do a study to say, okay, we're going to this particular place? How's the food? Are the roads okay? Do we have connections there? How are we going to sort out our day-to-day lives? Right? هل لهم غرض هناك? Did they have any purpose, objective? Did they have any business that they wanted to do there? Of course not. لا يعرفونهم ولا يعرفون طبائعهم. They did not know the people of Habasha, and they did not even know their culture or their ways. ولا يعرفون عاداتهم. They didn't even know their customs and their habits. How are we going to live with these people? Today when you go, for example, even in the business arena, before they go and send their business executives out, they say study the culture of these people before you go, so that when you go there, you know how to interact with them. So the Sahaba didn't know, but the Prophet gave a command, and they went. لا لهم أصحاب ولا لهم أصدقاء. They did not have any companions or friends. غرباء. They were strangers. خرجوا امتثالا لأمره. They went out only to fulfill this instruction and command of the Prophet حتى بعض بناته صلى الله عليه وسلم خرجنا معه. Some of the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ themselves went out with the Sahaba, right? فارقوا الوطن وفارقوا المكان. They left their homelands and they left the places that they were comfortable in. وبعد ذلك جاءت الهجرة إلى طيبة. And afterwards, after a few years, when they were in Abyssinia, the Prophet ﷺ, the instruction came for him to now emigrate to Medina. وأيام كان في طيبة ما الذي حصل. And these days that the Prophet ﷺ spent in Tayba in Medina, what happened? كلما جلس فترة خرجت السرايا التي يبعثها صلى الله عليه وسلم. What was his life like in Medina? When the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, was he sitting back and relaxing? They wouldn't find a time to rest until there was the next expedition or the next battle that was taking place. The historians, when they calculate the expeditions going out in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, it manifested in the form of battles and expeditions. And we can think of it in our time, indeed, da'wah outings that we go for, the da'wah trips or the da'wah expeditions, going out in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that takes many forms in today's times. How often do we go out in the path of Allah in terms of dedicating a certain amount of days in the month, right, or in the week, or in the year, purely for the sake of da'wah? Not to say, okay, we're going to go for holiday, and when we meet some people, we're going to give out some pamphlets to them. Meaning your intention for going out is da'wah. When the historians calculated the expeditions in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, not just in the Medinite period, in his entire period from prophecy till his lifetime, it was at every 2-week intervals. Like every 2 weeks, the Prophet ﷺ was going out. So there was no comfort. Right? فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. As soon the Battle of Uhud, as soon as they came back and they were wounded, the instruction came, go out again. And so this is the mindset a da'i needs to have. He needs to constantly be on the move. Where's the next project? Where's the next objective? Who's the next person you need to speak to? What's the next thing I can do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the sake of just to fill my time, but for the sake of the responsibility. And we spoke earlier that those who resemble the Prophet ﷺ most in his concern for the Ummah, they are the closest to him. A person can emulate the Prophet ﷺ in his outward form, the way he dressed, and there is immense barakah in that. But when you resemble the Prophet ﷺ in his internal states, and specifically with this concern that he had for the salvation of mankind, that's when now a person begins to understand our Da'wah has an outward form and da'wah has an inward form. Just like every other form of ibadah, or salah, or fasting. Muslim al-Ghazali's books speak about this. A person has been reading salah for 30, 40 years, but they might not have actually delved into the realities of what salah is about. They might have been fasting for many years, but they haven't delved into the realities of what fasting is about. And likewise, da'wah has an outward form. You can go and speak and give lectures, you can teach, right? You can even, people can be reverting or converting to Islam at your hands, and there is an outward form. But there is an inward reality of da'wah which a person will never understand until they are involved and they seek that sincerity. And when you seek that sincerity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then opens up this inward reality of da'wah. And so this is the history of our da'wah, of how Islam came to us. وَكَمْ أَيَّامٍ رَبَطَ الْحَجَرَ عَلَى بَطْنِهِ وَهُوَ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. How many days didn't pass by and the Prophet ﷺ tied a stone to his stomach while he was in Medina due to the difficulties, the hunger that they faced. Right? This was on account of the da'wah. So that this da'wah and this religion would reach us and you. And if the Prophet ﷺ had wanted, he could have lived like a king, right? But he went through hunger, he went through thirst for the sake of the Ummah. Many times we hear this, but do we realize and do we feel that the Prophet ﷺ did this for my sake? Not just, okay, so Islam came to us, okay, yeah, my great ancestors received Islam. No, for your sake. You have to think that the Prophet ﷺ, all of these sacrifices, he did it for you specifically. And when you feel that he did it for you, that's when you begin to understand the responsibility that you have now to repay that trust and do your work for the generations that are going to come. وَمَا هِيَ إِلَّا عَشْرُ سَنَوَاتٍ وَلَكِنْ كَمْ مِنْ بَرَكَاتٍ فِيهَا. And then it was only 10 years. Medina was only 10 years, but how much blessings were there in those 10 years? In 10 years, the Prophet ﷺ set up something which still today the entire Ummah is living on it. Right? The Islamic Khilafah and the lifestyle, even though we don't have the physical Khilafah in terms of governance, but our Muslim societies are still very, very vital and functioning. Right? Our Muslim society is fast, we give our zakah, right? We go for Hajj. The society, we have our marriages done according to the Islamic teachings. Right? Islam is alive. And how many companies in 10 years were able to do something, or how many projects in 10 years were able to do something which lasted thousands of years? Right? And so this is also in and of itself a miracle. لا زلنا نستقي منها ونشرب من ماء هذه العشر سنوات. Till today, we are still drinking from that cup, and we are still being quenched from that drink that the Prophet ﷺ gave in those 10 years. ومرت عليه بعض الأيام يبعث للبيوت تسعة ما يجد شيئا فيها للضيف. In those years, the Prophet ﷺ, guests would come to him, and he'd send word to 9 of his homes, his 9 wives, and they wouldn't find anything to give the guests to eat because there was nothing in their home. Right? Everything that they had, they gave for the sake of da'wah. Again, we spoke about in the previous lessons also how we deal with wealth. Right? One of the questions we also ask ourselves is how much of our wealth are we using for the sake of da'wah? If we are people of wealth and our path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lies in spending that wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like one reads the verses of the Quran and the ahadith that speak about wealth, one will get this understanding that Allah did not create wealth except to be spent in His path, not to be amassed. How many? If a person is not involved in the field of learning and teaching or any Islamic or religious projects or institutions, then how many of those projects or institutions are we supporting? Are we supporting a Hafidh of the Quran so that we can at least get the reward for his hifd if we weren't able to do hifd ourselves? Are we supporting someone who is studying the deen so we can get the reward? Anything that you would like to do in terms of not just dini but even non-shari'i sciences, support someone who's doing that financially with the intention, and you'll get the reward. You'll be raised up on the day of Qiyamah in the company of those people. You can be raised up on the day of Qiyamah in the company of the biggest of the ulama, right? Or the awliya, without you even having done what they did, but you supported them. Your intention was sincere in supporting them. وهو الذي يقول لبيته, the Prophet ﷺ had said, هو الذي يقول لبنته, the Prophet ﷺ said to his daughter, Sayyidina Fatima radiallahu anha, one day when he came back from one of the battles and he was dusty and disheveled, and Sayyidina Fatima radiallahu anha was crying, and she began to wipe the dust off the face of the Prophet ﷺ, and he could see the concern that she had for him in this difficulty that he's undergoing, and that the enemies of Islam were not accepting this message. And what did he tell her? ما يبقى من بيت مدر ولا وبر ولا حجر إلا دخله دين أبي. There will not remain a house of clay or of hair or of stone, meaning there will not remain a place on the face of this earth except that the religion of your father will enter into. Right? The time is close, inshallah. We hope that this time that the Prophet also spoke about, that the religion of Islam will enter into each and every single home. بِذِلِّ ذَلِيلٍ أو بعز عزيز. Either people will be honored through this, meaning they will willfully come to Islam, or they will be made humble to accept it, meaning through conquests, right? Or through Islamic expeditions or battles that will take place, and people will then come onto the deen. أمر قاهر بهذا الصبر بهذا الاحتمال. And so this, the Prophet ﷺ knew that this would be the case. It's an overpowering command from the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which no person and no army on the face of the earth will be able to withstand. And the Prophet ﷺ knew he could have relaxed and taken an easier path, because he knew this was going to be the outcome. But he had patience, he bore all of these responsibilities. وقال لأبي بكر وعمر رضي الله عنهما, he said to Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, ما الذي أخرجكما. One day he met them, Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, he met them. He came out of his house because he was hungry and he didn't find any food, and sometimes days would have went without food. So when he met Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, each one had walked out of their house and they all met, right, in the street. And he told them, why have you guys come out of your house? Why did you leave? Right? In our terminology, what brought you out of your house? قال الجوع. They said hunger. Right? قال قد أخرجني الذي أخرجكما. That which brought you out of your house has brought me out of my house. I am also hungry. This is Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, right? And the Prophet ﷺ. Who is best after them in terms of our role models? And for the sake of the deen. They could have, now we're looking at two things here. We're looking at the da'wah in terms of teaching people Islam, right? If we want to do lessons, teaching people the Sharia. There's an educational and academic aspect to that. So what's the reason? Why do we have to go hungry? We can teach, we're teaching our lessons that we have full plates, right? And this is that inner reality. When a person understands the inner reality of the da'wah, right, then they will be able to bear these hardships. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then will also test you to see how sincere you are in your da'wah. Just because we don't have an aircon, okay, then there won't be a lesson today. Or because there's no electricity, then we won't have a lesson today. How many times, because of just some small comfort, we cancel some of our ibadat or some of our efforts. هذه أيامه وهو في المدينة وجاء فتح مكة وجاءت الوفود وجاء الخراج والجزيات والزكوات من الأماكن المختلفة. These were the days the Prophet ﷺ spent in Medina, and thereafter came the conquest of Mecca and the confederates or the tribes that then came to accept Islam. And then people started giving the zakah and the jizya, meaning the wealth then started coming into the Baytul Mal. من الأماكن مختلفة, from the different lands. The spaces that the Prophet ﷺ had for these days, and on account of the hunger and the difficulties, Islam then spread to be the remainder of the Arabian Peninsula. ثم مع ذلك يتوفى ودرعه مرهونة عند يهودي في دين كان قد أخذه. Look at that. So the Prophet ﷺ, after Islam spreads to the Arabian Peninsula, and now all the tribes are coming, and they're sending their wealth for the zakah, right? In the process, mostly when they conquered Khaybar, they had, when the Prophet ﷺ took over any locality or any place, there was the war booty, right? How much war booty wasn't there? And he himself was allocated from the war booty a fifth. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى. 1/5 of the war, 20% of what the Ummah had in terms of wealth was for the Prophet ﷺ. So, does this mean the Prophet ﷺ was rich or was he poor? Was the Prophet ﷺ rich or poor? Of course, he was rich. Obviously, in this particular aspect we're looking at, right? He had a humus, he had 1/5 of the entire war booty. And they had taken over Khaybar, conquest of Makkah. We know at Hunayn, right? Prophet ﷺ gave mountains between a whole valley of sheep to one particular individual. Prophet ﷺ was rich, right? But then what happened? He passed away, and his shield was with a Jewish person that he had given them for the sake of some food for his family. He had, but he did not keep anything with him. Everything that they had, he gave away for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because obviously, wealth is the trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with the conquests, with all the wealth, with all the resources that the Prophet had, he didn't keep for himself. And so they say he passed away. The seerah says the Prophet passed away, and his shield was marhoon. Marhoon is like collateral. You give someone something because you don't have money, and you tell them, keep this, and when I pay you, then I'll take this back from you. And if I am not able to pay you, then you can keep it as the form of, and you can keep it as a form of exchange for whatever I did. So the Prophet took from a Jewish person, right? Not even from the Muslims. The Muslims knew, and this is another aspect, right? Would there be any Muslim in Medina who knew that the Prophet was hungry and did not come to his aid or to his help? Meaning the Muslims also didn't even know, right? The Muslims themselves in Medina didn't know this difficulty and the suffering that the Prophet went through. Perhaps maybe only a few, they themselves, for example, Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar didn't have. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, we know, was rich, but he underwent suffering. He underwent. This gives us some understanding of what it means. What does da'wah mean? وبعد هذه الفتوحات بحثوا في بيته فما وجدوا شيئا من الطعام إلا شطرا من شعير. And then after all these conquests and the conquest of Makkah and all the tribes that brought their zakah and brought their wealth to the Prophet ﷺ, when they searched in his home after his death, right, or even within his lifetime, ما وجدوا شيئا من الطعام إلا شطرا من شعير. They couldn't find any food in his house except a handful of wheat. Right, a handful of wheat. And Aisha anha, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, they would say for 3 months fire would not be lit in the house of the Prophet ﷺ. Which was asked, what did you eat? Dates and water. Meaning food was not a concern for them. Right? Food was not a concern for them. Because there were greater things that they were concerned about. Allahumma salli alayhi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi. نضع هذه الأمور أمام أعيننا ونعلم ما عندنا من الضعف والعجز. And so we place all of these things in front of us, and we need to realize our weakness and our incapacity, that we are not doing enough for this deen. ولكن ما نرضى أن نهوي وراء هذه الفانيات. And at the same time, we cannot be pleased to run after these perishable things of the world. After understanding all of this responsibility, and obviously Habib Umar is speaking to students here who are on the verge of graduating, right? And so they have gone through a process of tarbiyah with him for many years with Dar Mustafa, a very stringent program of adhkar, of education, and also training on da'wah. And so he's telling them after this, and after we understand these responsibilities, and understanding to some extent the difficulties that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba went through on account of the deen, will we then still be pleased to run after the world and run after the dunya? وَمَيْلُ النُّفُوسِ إِلَيْهَا وَتَعَلُّقِ الْقَلْبِ بِهَا. Right? In our nufus and ourselves leaning towards luxuries of the world, and our hearts becoming attached to them, looking for the next comfort in this life. وَهِيَ أَصْلًا مُسَخَّرَةٌ. When in reality, this dunya that we are running after, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it subservient to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered the dunya to be subservient to the one who is obedient to him. Right? But he's ordered the dunya to run away from the one who wants to make himself subservient to the dunya. And so they say, if you want the dunya, run away from it. The dunya will come running after you. But as long as you are running after the dunya, it's going to run away from you. Right? And how do you run away from dunya? You just concern yourself with the hereafter. Now some people, they understand that, they say, okay, so I'll do religious things, I'll concern myself with the outward of the hereafter, but in their hearts they still want the dunya. The dunya will run away from. When you truly run away from the dunya, you see the dunya will come to you without any effort. And that itself is a mujahada. والحالة المادية لزماننا بالنسبة لحالة الصحابة نادرة المشابهة لهم. And we cannot even compare, okay, the state of our dunya to the dunya of the Sahaba. We have everything at our ease, in our comfort. In fact, they would say that the average person in today's times lives a better life than the kings of the past. If you just look at the kings of someone who owned the earth from east to west, Alexander the Great, for example, right? But when he was hot on hot day, what did he need to do? He needed to get a servant to come and, fan him with some leaves of, right? And if you saw the aircon which we have in our cars, in our home, he says, you guys are living the life of kings. When they wanted cold water, what did they need to do? They had to fill that water skin and leave it underground, Now they come, we see the fridges that we have. So who's living the life of kings? In reality, electricity, everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in our hands. How do we use every blessing that Allah has given us for the sake of the deen? Right? Or at least every blessing that Allah gives you, have this concept. Allah has taught us that of your wealth you give 2.5%. Right? But look at every blessing that you have. How can I give of every blessing that Allah has given me a portion of that, or use a portion of that for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So for example, if you have a comfortable lifestyle, you have, for example, an aircon in your house, right? There are people that don't even have fans in their house. How can you give part of that blessing to someone else, right? And then obviously this, how to uplift people, how to be involved in the development of people, because that is also a big part of da'wah. Da'wah is not just going and teaching people about Islam and end of story. Right? Over and above that, it's taking them step by step after they have accepted Islam. And that's the most difficult step. But then lifting them out of difficult situations, lifting people out of poverty. And the da'wah of zakah and community development, this is an entire field on its own. Right? How do you take care of people? And it will be better for you, instead of giving your zakah here and there to different organizations, choose one particular family that you know is in need, and you see to all of their needs. See to their kids' education, see to their home, making it comfortable for them. All that will be better for you than to give 1,000 different people different amounts of money, but next year they're in the same situation that they find themselves in. And the purpose of mentioning all of this is so that we understand our objectives and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these blessings He has given us. And we do not lean with our hearts towards these perishable things of this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created this world such that the deen cannot be established without the dunya. Like you cannot build Islamic institutes without money. You cannot do da'wah without money. You cannot print books without money. Look at any portion or any, for example, when you look at Islamic institutions and masjids and all these things, what are they looking for? They're looking for funding, right? Who do they come looking for funding for? And so the deen needs the dunya. The ulama need the traders. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this dunya. But He does not want us to lean with our hearts that this is the be-all and end-all. This is the means. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can establish things without means. But now when you are establishing, we find people when they want to when they want to establish the da'wah, the first thing they start looking for is they want to secure funding, or they want to secure the external means. Whereas if you look at all successful da'wah initiatives, they all started from scratch, teaching someone at home, teaching someone, some of the Syrian Mashaykh, people would come to their homes and he would put his family behind the cupboard because he only had one home. He would put his wives and daughters behind the cupboard, right? And he'd teach children or whatever they were reciting Quran to him for like half an hour in the morning. That was how he started. And imagine if he had to wait to say, I'd start the da'wah until I actually have a place in a nice institute. Nothing would have gotten that. فليس أحد منا من قوم ربطوا الحجر ولا من قوم لا يوجد في بيتهم إلا الماء. None of us are of the type of people who have had to tie stones on their stomach, or nor are we of those who don't find even a cup of water in their homes. فلا أحد منا من هذا الصنف. There is no Muslim, right, that has this qualification or description that they are doing so much effort for the da'wah that this is the conditions that they are living. وإذا نحن مما لم نتعب أنفسنا فعلى الأقل نشكره تعالى. And so if we have not gone to this extent, and we have not been tired to this extent on the sake of the da'wah, then the least that we need to do is thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these blessings. وَنَعْلَمُ عَجْزَنَا وَضَعْفَنَا. And we need to realize our weakness and our incapacity. وَنُؤَدِّ حَقَّ الْمَوْجُودَ الَّذِي عِنْدَنَا. And we need to give the right of what we have, right, what we have been given, what has been given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything that we have been given, there is a haqq. So for example, they would say, your wealth has a zakah. That zakah is obviously the 2.5%. But your car is a zakah. What is the zakah of your car? Is to give people a lift. What is the zakah of your food? Your zakah of your food is to also assist people. Everything that you have has a zakah. And you need to know how to give the right of that blessing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah yuwaffiqna wa iyyakum wa yanzuru ilayna wa iyyakum. Allah guide us and you, and He gaze upon us and you, and we'll stop there today, inshallah. Continue with the next lesson. The next day, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq, to grant us understanding, to allow this Ramadan to pass by being the most blessed Ramadan on the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, and to relieve all difficulties of the Ummah, especially the people in Gaza and the people in Palestine. Now, Mashaykh also reminded us that of those people who are rightful to receive our zakah, the mujahideen. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the 8 categories Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions in the Quran, for those who are able to receive zakah are the mujahideen. And we shouldn't forget the people of Gaza and Palestine and the entire Ummah in our du'as, especially at the time of iftar, and at the time of tahajjud, and at the time of all the ibadah and all the Quran recitation, adhkar that we are doing, lessons that we are attending. We ask Allah to send the reward of all of it to the mujahideen, to be a form of assistance for them. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.